Good.
We're on?
Yes, we're
Cool.
on.
Welcome everyone to another F10 Lunch Learn session. Welcome online. Also, our speakers are dialing in today from online. Still hope it works everything well with the screen here in the room. Welcome everyone in the room, and glad to see that all of you found something to eat already. Very nice. So today we have really a nice topic around crypto and what are common mistakes in the blockchain space, right? What can go wrong, what can go right? And I'm super excited to have the people from R3 who are an F10 corporate partner since a few years already, global corporate partner, also working with our teams in Singapore, and to have them talk about exactly those topics. And we will see Tim, Lobsang, and Bastian from the different sub-teams, and they will introduce themselves as well just in a bit. Before we go there, I would like to quickly take a few minutes to talk about F10, what we are, how we do what we do, and don't want to overstretch it. I think the big message to take away what is F10 is it's an ecosystem. And our ecosystem is designed to bring together innovation and new ideas from startups and younger companies and bring a lot of that then into the bigger incumbents, the big insurances, the big banks out there, but more and more also it's about also blockchain adoption, and how to make sure that startups are using, for example, a dedicated blockchain or a protocol, right, in that sense. We work with that setup on a global scale. We started in Switzerland, went to Singapore, Spain, and currently are going into the Nordics. Nordics with a clear focus around sustainability and finance, and we look at the overlap. We just started last week the first program up there with new startups going through the different Nordics location. We so far have about 250 startups that went through our program and created over 2,000 jobs internationally. Maybe just very quick to give an information also on where we're coming from and where we are today and where we are going. But we really started 7 years ago within six, obviously the Swiss Stock Exchange, also the building where we are here in person today. And then over the time, first became an association with more partners like Julius Baer, PwC, to get innovation into their companies as well and be involved in what we call open innovation, exactly the collaboration startup and corporates. Over time, I mentioned the geographical expansion, and just recently this year, a funding round with external capital to fuel further growth, but also a management buyout where we were now participating in the F10 and making sure we just double down on what F10 is and bring F10 more globally as well. The team, just that you get a glimpse of it, we are close to 30 people at this stage, average age, many ex-founders as well. I think that's super important also for the startups that come in, like to have the common language, having had already touchpoint and having walked the same path already, and can give really hands-on advice and share experience. I don't want to do much more on my end and would like to hand over to, I don't know, who will share the screen. I think it's best if you do that, and I bring it up here. Okay. Who will share from you?
Perfect. So I think that's my cue there. So let me share my screen.
Perfect. Can I make this?
Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see it perfectly well.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much, F10, for having us, having me and Tim here to speak to you on this Lunch and Learn. And thank you to the audience for your time. I wish I could be there in person, but hopefully we can sort that out for next time. Just to give you sort of a quick introduction to myself, my name is Lobsang Lama. I work for the venture development team here at R3. And just a bit of background, I worked in three years in sales, 2 years in consulting, and outside of my full-time job, I've been involved in many early stage projects. I went to an accelerator here in London about 2 years ago. I've started a travel tech company. It didn't do too well because it was pre-pandemic, so it was the perfect time to start a travel company. And yeah, so today I'm excited to be talking to you guys about we're going to be starting off talking about the venture development program, and then we'll go into our blockchain technology, which we leverage, which is Corda. And then I've also invited Tim here today from the Conclave team to give you a quick glimpse at what exciting news we have to share with you on Conclave side of things. So just to introduce you to the venture development program, and I guess why this presentation would be relevant to you guys. We're essentially a corporate accelerator. We help you to accelerate your business and your business initiatives. To date, we have over 270 startups in the program, and we've raised over 300 million for these startups. And we have a great network of investors and mentors, which you will get a sneak peek at a little bit later. So. In terms of the team, I work as part of a global team. We have offices in New York and Singapore as well. So what we basically do, we accelerate your business goals. So if you're looking for fundraising help, if you're looking for go-to-market, if you're looking for some mentors that you'd like to connect with, or if you're looking to develop your technology and need some actual technical expertise, these are the sorts of 4 pillars that we can help you with. Just a sort of quick sneak peek look at who we typically work with and who's in our sort of network. We have VCs and investors, so that's obviously there for the fundraising aspects. You'd send us your pitch deck, we'd introduce you to them, create those warm introductions. We obviously have a great cohort of startups. We have great sort of ecosystem partnerships with accelerators like F10 and many other corporates. And we have many mentors who work in industries like BNP, EY, all of the big names there. So, and I guess the most important question, why join the program? Essentially, you will have access to all the venture portal. You have access to the community. You get access to perks, and we are cost and equity free. So, all the best things in life are free. So, moving on, I think this is a sort of a good. I would say this is probably the most important thing I would like you to think about today. From this presentation today, I would really like you to think about if the technology that I'm speaking about could be relevant to you. And I guess there are 4 things that you should really be thinking about. In terms of your business, I'm sure many of you are founders looking to start your own companies. If you're transacting data between parties, that's where. These are some of the key things that we look for, basically. If you want to remove intermediaries, if you want to reach a consensus between these parties, and if you want an auditable trail of transactions that you can backlog and look at, these are some of the things that I'm going to be discussing about today, and I believe these slides will be available to you as well. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. With that said, we're going to move on to our company and Corda. So just to give you an idea, just setting the scene about our company, we are a trust technology provider. And if you think about sort of the general B2B environment, there is inherently no trust in it. If you know game theory, you understand this very well. We operate right now in a trustless society where businesses don't know the intentions of other businesses, and we're basically helping to create trust between these parties by exchanging data, and which inherently leads to value creation. So we do this in 2 ways. We have Corda and we have Conclave. Corda is on the private permission blockchain side, while Conclave is on the confidential computing side. And Tim will be talking more about Conclave a little bit later on. So in terms of a quick history of R3, just a whistle-stop tour of what we've done. So we started off in 2015. At this time, blockchain was this new exciting technology, which many people had heard about. There were rumors on the streets about how it's going to be leveraged and whatnot. But when it came to all of these big banks that were looking to leverage technology, they didn't really understand how to do it. So they were creating these environments, sandbox environments, where they were experimenting on their own. And then our CEO and founder came up with a great idea of just creating a consortium, getting all of those banks in one roof together, and figuring out what one technology could be used for the whole network of banks. So that's where we sort of Corda was developed, and that's where we kind of commercialized it and released our Corda Enterprise licenses. And then in 2021, we've been working on Conclave, which Tim will speak about. And I guess the most recent landmark moment is the DTCC selecting us as the underlying tech for Project Ion. If you know the DTCC, you know that they have, I believe 1.4 million transaction volumes per day, with 600 billion in value per day. So that's a real sort of testament to our technology and like the trust that we've been able to build with these financial institutions. So I won't go into too much detail here, but you can clearly see who we work with. We work with banks, financial market infrastructure and exchanges, independent software vendors, corporates, and central banks. So plenty of big enterprise companies, and I would say mostly in the financial sector, but we see loads of different use cases in healthcare and telecoms and whatnot. So I guess coming to the sort of the meat of this presentation, you're probably wondering, okay, like I understand the audience is quite broad in the sense of knowledge of blockchain. So just starting very high level, why you use blockchain technology, right? And I guess this goes to this a good way of thinking about it is Web 2 versus Web 3. So when the internet revolution happened, there were tech companies that had all of this data, and all of the data was centralized to a particular party. So if we look here on the left, if this person wanted to make a transaction with this person, that transaction would have to go through an intermediary, and then of course both of them would have transactions, but this having a middleman there creates friction in the process. While on the Web 2 side of things, there is no sort of central entity that is intermediating all of these transactions. Everyone on the transaction will be transacting amongst themselves, and everyone will have a piece. Everyone will have a piece of the ledger or the data that is being transacted on. So I guess this is sort of a good point to stop and to quickly say that in terms of using blockchain technology, you have to understand if it actually helps to enhance your value proposition, right? And I think a lot of the companies that we see are saying that they want to use blockchain technology and they want to leverage the trustful environment, but it just doesn't make sense in their case. So I would say like this is a very important point. And just to sort of visualize this a little bit better, so with blockchain technology, if it helps to think about the network on a very small scale, right? And then we can then extrapolate out and to sort of the whole population. So here we have 4 people transacting in a network, and so let's say Bob is paying Alice, for a transaction. Everyone sees this transaction, right? So we can see here TX1, 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 TX1. So all of these people in the chain or in the network are seeing this transaction. So when you're working with businesses, this isn't ideal because there might be some deals or there might be some transactions being made which you don't want to be made public. So I think this is a very important consideration, the privacy. You don't get that with a public blockchain. The next part is the scalability, right? So there are 4 people in this network, and let's say in the same example, so Bob transacts with Alice. All of the transactions, everyone has access to that transaction, and everyone stores that transaction in their ledger. So we have transaction 1, transaction 2. So everyone sees the same information, and everyone stores the same information. So when you're thinking about scalability, if you come up to, it doesn't really make sense when you scale to sort of a huge population, because if I'm going to sort of a convenience store and buying chewing gum, that transaction, if I was to use a public blockchain network, everyone in that network wouldn't be notified that I bought that piece of gum. And you can you can think about it, whether that is useful information or not, but you need to think about storage and scalability when it comes to these things. So and the last point is the latency. So with latencies, all of these transactions that are happening within these networks need to be processed, and for it to be processed, they're put into certain blocks, and these blocks are being processed periodically. So in terms of the transaction and when it completes, it isn't certain when that may happen. So these are some of the considerations when you need to think about when you're using blockchain technology and whether you think if it's suitable for your value proposition. Now, in terms of how we approach it, we have Quarter. We designed Quarter here. So Quarter works on a need to know basis. So we have the exact same network here of these 4 participants: Bob, Demi, Alice, and Carl. But let's say in this instance, in a similar instance, Bob pays Alice. So this is transaction 1. Now, as you can see here, Demi doesn't see that transaction. So, it's on a need to know basis. So only Bob and Alice are involved in that transaction, in that first transaction where Bob pays Alice. So, only they see that data. Now, if Alice then pays Carl, which is the transaction number 2, then Alice and Carl will have access to that information, and Carl will only see that information if it's required for them to see it. So I think with this, it improves the scalability and the privacy tremendously. So and it makes sense, and it helps businesses, and it gives businesses that confidence to transact with each other, because businesses know that other people within the network, within the business network, aren't going to be seeing the data that they're seeing. So I think this is sort of a very pertinent point, and why Quarter is so different from the public blockchains, which everyone's sort of heard of. So it's like a new iteration of a blockchain for businesses. So, and the final point I wanted to talk about is the latency. So because these transactions are, when we're not putting them on a block, these transactions are executed individually and immediately. So these transactions will happen immediately. So if you want to pay Alice, that transaction is instantaneous, while you won't have to wait for the blocks to be processed or the transaction to be processed while on a public blockchain. And then similarly, why use private permission blockchain? This is more of, I guess, a summary slide of everything we've discussed today. On the left, you can see the public blockchain, for example, Ethereum, what kind of guiding principles they have, what it means for scalability, privacy. These are some of the things we've discussed already. I think it's a very important point to mention compliance and regulation, because if you think about the clients that we work with, the central banks, the financial market exchanges, these are very heavily regulated industries, and with this regulation, it means that what the transactions that are taking place have been regulated by the governing bodies. The governing bodies can be a part of the network and can see the transactions taking place. So they have these governing bodies know that whatever transaction is happening, they trust that technology is working for them. And then we have smart contracts, very similar to what was happening on Ethereum, but these smart contracts are legally bound. And again, this leads back to the compliance point, where everything that you do on the network is legally bound and legally enforceable. So I think that's a very important point, and how we differ from other public cryptos or public exchanges like FTX, which have recently seen the downfall in the news lately. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention was the programming accessibility. So in terms of how you develop on Quarter, we use Java and Kotlin to develop the actual network. Well, on the public blockchain side, it'd be like Solidity. So this slide will roughly shows you like what we typically see in terms of like the use cases. So we have risk and compliance, digital asset management, smart contract automation, data sharing, reconciliation, payments and settlements, payments, assets and tokenization, and end-to-end exchanges. These slides will, I believe, will be made available to you, so you can definitely have a look in more detail. And these are some of the companies, those are obviously use cases which are great, but these are some examples of companies that have actually developed in the venture development program, and we support them throughout the development process, and help them to accelerate their go-to-market as well. So we have Agora here, bond issuance, tokenized collateral with LCH, unsecured money market lending with Instamatch Global, secondary trading of corporate bonds with letter edge, intraday FX swaps, digitizing precious metals. So this is to do with provenance of the actual gold, cross-border trade and supply chains with DLT ledgers, and end-to-end processing with letters of credit. So, these are some of the most successful companies that we've seen in our venture development program, and we're continuing to support them. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tim. Tim, are you ready?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Saying. If you want to go to the next slide. So thanks everyone for having me here today. It's great to speak with you all. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Conclave, which is our confidential computing solution, how that interacts with Corda, and how that solves some of the potential challenges or mistakes that are made when applying blockchain solutions. So to give you a bit of background, Conclave came about from our work with CBDCs for central banks, because the idea was that if you could create a central bank digital currency using Corda, that's fantastic, but you're still facing the challenge that I might not want anyone else to know where my funds are coming from or how much funds I hold. Right? If you're going to create this digital payment system, this digital cash, it exposes a lot of your activities to the wider chain, and in some cases you might not care. In some cases you would care very much and you wouldn't want that. So I need to prove to Lobsang that I can pay my bill to him, but I don't want him to know how much I make. I don't want him to know that Bastion has paid me for something I've done. So that's where Conclave comes in. It's the ability to utilize information and to verify information while still maintaining the privacy and security. And really, when we think about blockchain, one of the challenges that it solves is that either people are putting too much information on the chain, which they don't need to be or they shouldn't be, or they're not utilizing blockchain because they're afraid of privacy concerns. So next slide, Lobsang. As we see, the world is becoming increasingly confidential. So as we start utilizing these new technologies, blockchain in particular, it's very important to have those privacy concerns in mind. And again, Corda is a private chain, so it's specifically designed to have that bit of privacy. But even within Corda, there are things to consider. The world is becoming much more savvy around data privacy regulations. So in Europe, of course, like GDPR, that's been around a while. In the States, it's different depending where you go. But a lot of markets, APAC's a great example where a lot of those countries are now becoming much more progressive with their data protection regulations, which poses a little bit of a challenge, but also an opportunity as those frameworks are established to understand how to utilize it. Much more things are moving to the cloud, and really a lot of the data sharing policies that we have are not adequate. So there's all these challenges that we need to face, and again, blockchain is a good way to use that, but Conclave can be used in conjecture to just go one step farther. Next slide, please, Lobsang. So I'll jump to the use cases with blockchain in more detail in a sec, but to kind of reconfirm what Conclave is, it's the ability to protect data in use. So we're really good generally as organizations, we claim to be, or we hope to be good about protecting data when it's on your own hosting solution, when it's in your own data center, behind your firewalls. Data in transit has been solved, quote unquote solved for quite a while with things like TLS, which is the gold standard, or the noise protocol, which is what WhatsApp uses to protect your information. But if you can protect data in use, if you can protect that data when it's being shared with someone else and guarantee and prove the confidentiality, it opens up a lot of different avenues. And what Conclave is, it's the ability to create solutions which sit on a segmented processing chip for a machine, right? So this is a special chip that has the sealing key burnt in on the silicon level. Unless you crack open that machine, if you break into a data center, find that specific machine, crack it open, put your probes on it, you're not getting in there. Conclave allows you to move applications into that environment to run privately and securely. And it also provides a report to demonstrate the security and privacy of that. So there's loads of applications without blockchain. We're using that a lot for data aggregation. Payment fraud example is a great way where we're working with banks to aggregate sensitive data to better detect fraud, or insurance double dipping fraud. Two insurers can aggregate data and then match and see if there's double dipping of claims. But back to the blockchain and some examples of how this technology might be used with Corda. So I mentioned that there's two challenges. You can go back, Lobsang. I'm actually going to glance over these slides because they're not so blockchain specific, and I want to be targeted to that. But going back to some of the challenges I mentioned, right, which is putting too much information on the chain or not putting enough information or not putting a solution, not utilizing blockchain because of your concerns about privacy. Let's start with that second one. So, let's say, for example, you need to cooperate amongst a number of different banks, and you just essentially, this is an arbitrary case, but you want to use blockchain to create a ledger of the balances of those banks at the end of the day from their interbank transfers. So you've got a network of 10 banks. They're all sending money back and forth to each other's accounts for various reasons. I send money to Lobsang, he's another bank. That transfer goes across, and we see all that happening. You could potentially put that all on the ledger so that you would have a clear record at the end of the day of what everyone is doing. But that's a huge amount of information to put on the ledger, and it also exposes a lot of potential identity risks around, exposing your customers' information to other banks. If these banks are cross borders, there's different data privacy and data sovereignty rules to comply with. So potentially you don't go for that blockchain solution because it doesn't fit what you were trying to do, and it doesn't meet the regulatory requirements of sharing information. What you could do then is you could set up these different conclave solutions. And what's really important about conclave is you can also verify the code that's running in there. So all these banks deploy a solution inside their specific conclave environments, which they know the code that's running the other banks, which is just a very simple, algorithm to measure all the transfers and then output a balance at the end of the day. So that balance itself is not confidential because you are obscuring the different customer and transactions and the PII involved, but you get a guaranteed output, and all banks are confident and comfortable, and they understand exactly what's going to happen in those solutions. So they can trust, they don't have to trust the bank is entering correct results. They have that verified through code that they know what's going on, and what's put out at the end of the day is that balance, and that goes on the ledger, and then that can be shared amongst the other banks. So in that sense, you're able to still preserve the privacy of those individuals, but while still also guaranteeing that they're acting as they should, that code to process that and deliver the balance at the end of the day is what it should be. And you're then putting that on the ledger because that isn't confidential, but that's what needs to be verified on the ledger. So that's one example, and it's fairly arbitrary. I'm sure someone in the audience is saying that doesn't make sense. Why would you share those balances or something like that? But anyways, it's just to illustrate how conclave can be used in conjecture with Corda, or in collaboration with Corda, excuse me. Let's talk about the other use case, which is putting too much on the chain. So we see this a lot with KYC, which is a great example. Someone wants to put a bunch of KYC documents onto the ledger and then use that to verify with various departments inside a bank, which is certainly a good use case. And that's a great example of Corda. Again, you're creating one kind of log of that person meeting those KYC values, and you don't have to repetitively do that. But what you're also doing is you're also sharing that information across the bank and creating multiple risk and multiple fault points, right? If everyone who's running a node now has access to that information, that's a bunch of different security protocols that you need to adhere to. And really, you're kind of opening yourself up for more potential risk. So instead of putting all that information, and it could be quite a lot of information, it could be quite sensitive information that fall into the wrong hands, could, not your keys, not your coins. We can talk about that in a bit. Instead, what you can do is you can run a KYC validation engine inside Conclave. You can put all your information or all your client's information into that secure environment, which proves to the client that even you can't see it. Your algorithm is running over that information and doing the KYC due diligence. It's automating that bit for you. But as the maybe KYC analyst at that bank, you don't actually have to see that information, which is really attractive to a lot of these high net worth individuals, those crypto whales, et cetera, or even organizations who value their privacy. You can validate the KYC, and then you can put that token or that proof of KYC, that proof of validation on the chain, and simply share that between the different departments on the banks. Because then, let's say a different department at the bank suffers a breach, they're not seeing that Lobsang has this address and this account and this amount of funds, et cetera. All they're seeing is that Lobsang has passed the KYC check for this department. So, there's loads of different ways that these technologies can be applied together, and everyone's really excited about blockchain. Everyone's trying to do things on blockchain, but they often run into these challenges around the privacy or potentially overexposing themselves and their risks. Corda does a really good job of mitigating that second piece because, of course, it's a private and permission chain. But if you're protecting against insider attacks in your organization, that's certainly an area where Conclave can come in and help. So I see that there's some questions in the chat. I don't know if we have more time to talk about our stuff or if it's now time for the Q&A.
I mean, you have more slides, right? We can definitely take another 5 minutes and then go into the questions.
Sure, I can talk about more about what we're doing with Conclave specifically, and then how that can be utilized by anyone in the room. So next slide, Lobsang. Again, just to kind of reiterate how Conclave works and functions. So it's that Intel SGX chip right there at the base, and that's that private chip that's sealed at the silicon level in the machine. There's then our Conclave core and our Conclave cloud functions on top of that. With the Conclave core is an SDK that allows you to develop your solution yourself. Cloud is a bit more lighter touch, meaning you can just focus on the code and put your solution into an environment that we manage. Of course, you get the proof that it's secure and that we can't access anything that's happening there. And then we can help you build with our professional services. But really what we're doing with Conclave, and whether that's on Corda or without Corda, is, next slide, Lobsang, to try and change the trust model. Because Lobsang's point, a lot of times we don't really want to trust the people that we're working with, but we're forced to by nature of convenience. And you do things like InfoSec audits, and you do contracts, and you do all sorts of clauses and penalties. But ultimately, whenever you're giving your information to someone else, you're putting yourself at risk. With Conclave, we're trying to simplify that trust model and bring it just down to the business logic of the application that you're porting your data into. So is that solution that's processing my data written correctly, is it going to accidentally expose it? That's all you're worrying about, not an admin or an engineer on the other side who gets disgruntled and wants to post all your information to GitHub, like what happened with Capital One. Next slide. Again, Conclave is really supposed to make this process easy. This technology can be quite complex, and blockchain by itself, it can be tough enough to get through. So we've created this as Conclave as an abstraction layer to that more complex technology to make it very easy to integrate your Corda solutions with Conclave, and to use Conclave as a way to bolster your privacy and security when you're using private blockchains. And I can just go into one more use case outside of the blockchain piece quickly, Lobsang, if you want to go to the next slide. So back to what I said, double dipping, fraud, insurance. Again, if you wanted to aggregate information, and that's another piece that I probably is worth mentioning. Conclave is really good for multi-party aggregation, multi-party information sharing that needs to remain private. So again, going back to the blockchain and how this might interact, we're speaking to banks across Saudi Arabia who are looking to swap and compare notes on potential fraud and potential criminal activity, and then create a master sanction list. So they're able to share their information across the banks. It's compiled in a single environment through Conclave, and then they're doing fraud analysis on that. And when that analysis turns up a positive result, someone has committed fraud, they do belong in this sanction list, they're able to enter that onto a Corda chain to validate across all the banks that, this is someone who should not be dealt with. Insurance, we see that as well, because insurance companies can't really share their claims information with one another. The process to do so is quite expensive and cumbersome if you really do suspect that there's fraud. So oftentimes a lot of these companies will pay out on claims that they find are somewhat suspicious because it's just simply too much effort to validate from going through the legal process of getting a subpoena to collaborate. Instead, if you host that information inside a secure environment, that proves to the regulator that one another aren't seeing that information, and proves to the insurance providers that each other aren't seeing how they price policies and any of that sensitive customer or commercial information. You can then quickly and automatically, you can automate the process of screening and checking to make sure there's if there's double dipping claims or not. So just quickly to wrap on the next slide, there's sorry, I just seen the chat. I can address that once we go to the Q&A. Anyways, onto the next slide, Lobsang. Anywhere that you're looking to improve security, secure cloud information in the cloud, foster intra-company collaboration, or run confidential analytics, we're happy to speak about Conclave and talk to you a little bit about how the venture development program can help you integrate that solution and what we can do there with Corda as well. So that's Conclave, and that's what we're doing. I can address some of the questions in the chat, specifically Tillman's, if now's a good time, or...
Sure. Do you want to go with the first one about the stablecoin? Then I put it up on the stage so the audience can see it as well. Or do you want to go with the second one with the security issues?
So the security issue is one for me, but maybe Lobsang, Bastian, I don't know if you have a...
So for the audience, you can see the question that's been posted in the chat in the bottom left corner.
So, all right, in terms of the Intel's supposed security being tricky, there's a couple reasons why there's that stigma. The first is that they put it out to a bunch of academics. And if you look at a lot of the breaches that happened for Intel, a lot of it comes from academic research where you have access to the chips and you're able to, again, put probes and really have time to play around with that. In a practical sense, is someone going to have, an hour to break into a data center and crack open machines? Is someone inside the data center going to be able to? It's not likely, but it's not a perfect science. And I will say that, there have been instances or challenges in the past. Intel has the ability to patch the chips via microcode, which they do. And if you look at what's on the market, again, it's not a perfect science, and I won't say that, but I will say that it's a much more secure version of what we're trying to do. Another thing is that the Intel chips themselves, if you're working directly with the Intel SGX SDK, it's very complex. And unless you're really very familiar and almost an expert, well, not almost, unless you're an expert in that kind of confidential computing and the programming for those environments, it's very easy to code mistakes and backdoors into your own solution. That's what we kind of built. Well, it's not kind of, it's why we designed Conclave. It's really to be an abstraction layer on that very complex software in order to kind of minimize that risk and eliminate that risk of coding something that puts yourself at fault. So between making it easy and building the business logic into that makes it straightforward to use these devices, and again, by without providing access to the chips, and if you're hosting it either on your own on-premise data center or in the cloud, those risks of those breaches definitely decrease to a point that a lot of customers feel and a lot of regulators feel comfortable using. I will say that there was a bit of a foot and mouth when the SGX chips were initially released, because there was big releases about how these were impenetrable and it was the next big thing. And then when people got their hands on them and their probes on them, they were able to find some faults. But again, it's not a perfect science, but we're quite comfortable, and a lot of our customers and regulators are comfortable now with the level that Intel SGX provides.
Next question, if you had questions here on the audience side in the room.
I also have one from...
Should we start with the one? Corda have bridge with EVM compatibility?
Yes. So in terms of Corda and Ethereum, and our view on interoperability, we've actually built a bridge between Corda and Ethereum. It's been very early stages in demo mode at the moment. But in terms of our view on it, we are looking to we're looking to be in a thriving ecosystem, right? And we're looking to build those bridges with public blockchains. We're obviously operating on the private blockchain side at the moment, but we do know that the public blockchain is a big part of the market, and we are building those bridges. So thank you for that question, Sarel. And to answer the public stablecoin question, in terms of the public stablecoins, we work with, I believe, 16 central banks, and each of them, as you can imagine, have their own sort of stablecoin project that they're working on. So we don't have a public stablecoin which is available to the whole ecosystem. It is very much based on the client's needs and the ecosystem that they're trying to build for themselves.
Can you say something about the state of that discussions and when we can see the first one go live in Europe, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, like our CBDC team have done a fantastic job, and they've created a fantastic demo, and we're working with many central banks on this. So I can't give too much information on this. There are some pieces of information that you can find on our website. I'm more than happy to provide those links later on. But yeah, it is in early stages. But we have a strategy in place, and we're making it work.
Great. We have questions from the room here. Anything that you want to deep dive or know or probe? If not, we have one around maybe two things, like what you're currently seeing as the hot use cases, maybe beyond the CBDCs. Like what is happening? What is the request from the corporate side?
Also, sorry, just before we get into that, I will say that in Kazakhstan, they did use a quarter CBDC to pay for coffee. So we are getting there, and we were quite excited by that. I'm not sure how good the coffee was, but the payment was really thrilling.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. Mark, could you repeat your question? Oh, you were asking about what sort of use cases we're seeing. So I think I think we're seeing, tokenization is a very big aspect that we're noticing a lot of startups in our ecosystem, leveraging that and coming up with new ideas to make that happen, particularly around ESG. We have a company in our portfolio, Rebalance Earth, sorry, not New Balance Earth. And, they're doing some great things with tokenization there of credits, carbon credits, and, loads of ESG startups there. We're also seeing marketplace exchanges, where you have to transact between two parties. I would say, those are the two sort of main types of use cases that we're seeing. And I guess one last thing is provenance. So, when you're actually, like I mentioned, Exedrus, when you're tracking the provenance of a particular asset, where it comes from. If you buy a mango from the supermarket, you want to know where it's coming from. We have the technology to be able to allow you to track where that mango came from the roots, from suppliers. So provenance and trade supply is definitely an interesting and up and coming use case.
Yes, I would have a question. I found this case of the insurance fraud quite interesting. But what I didn't quite get is, do you still need an underlying blockchain, or can you separate this like trusted environment where you compute the two claims and try to compare them without the blockchain? Because what I don't get is what benefit provides having it on blockchain in this case.
Sure. So for that one, it's not specifically that solution with ClaimShare doesn't utilize the blockchain. That was just an example of what can be achieved with aggregating data from multiple parties who traditionally cannot share data because of regulatory compliance. Back to the sanction list that I mentioned, that's where something where blockchain would come in, where you want to create a immutable ledger that this person was on the sanction list. It really depends on how you would want to use and what would be that purpose. You can be quite flexible with Conclave in the fact that you can use it with blockchain, you can use it without. But yeah, to your point, there wasn't use of blockchain there, so I can see why that would have been confusing.
You have another question? No? And maybe one other that I would be interested in is around, like you touched on Web3. Obviously, how is the way from Web 2 to Web3? How do you see that? Do you see it going through a Web 2.5, or like what is happening there? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of focus. Like obviously, Web3 is definitely on the mind, and I guess the crypto winter has kind of slowed it down a little bit in terms of like just the general progress and traction there. And the collapse of FTX doesn't really help and solve that situation. So I think there definitely instances like that definitely mitigates the progress of Web3, and it's not a good look. And I guess that's where I guess why we're coming into the market and a little bit more on the forefront, because we, in terms of the private blockchain, we offer the blockchain experience, but for businesses, and it actually makes sense for businesses to work on that. So I think we're seeing adoption of our technology of the private blockchains being utilized a lot more, and the DTCC deal was sort of a landmark deal, which kind of we internally we definitely see as an inflection point in sort of the blockchain space, and sort of the product market fit that we've been able to achieve. So we only think, there's going to be a rise of private blockchains, private permissionless blockchains. And, I feel like there's going to be a real movement towards that. Of course, when, the optimism around crypto is, finally kind of reignites, there'll be a lot of that will accelerate the development towards Web3. But for right now, I believe the market is quite quiet.
I almost actually disagree with you there, Lobsang. I think you mentioned there that you think once crypto winter ends, it'll be much more excitement. I think there's already that excitement. I think things like the big crypto boom and NFT boom, which has shrunken dramatically, they excite a lot of people by the idea, and I think that the shift from Web 2 to Web 3 is actually going to be more subtle and a lot more of those back end processes. Things like DTCC that the general consumer or general user isn't really going to have specific knowledge of, but it's going to start powering the infrastructure that makes their life possible. And of course, you do see things like the CBDC coming into prominence, and that again, I think, will be a much more subtle transition to, instead of paying with cash, you're paying with a CBDC. But that's not going to be that kind of groundbreaking shift. We saw a lot of things happen with the rise of crypto, where people were overnight millionaires and not billionaires, and then the next day they were in so much debt they couldn't take it. But I think that actually what we're moving towards is suddenly we're at Web3, and you didn't even realize it. But that's at least my opinion.
Over time, and also more in the background, and then at some point you might not even have this cumbersome MetaMask connection anymore to make it Web3, but it will be more seamless, integrated, and you don't even feel and see it that much. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and maybe just if I can jump in here, I think there's also, we're talking a lot about fintech, but there are other use cases as well, especially where I've been a mentor on. When you think about the art side, the art market, where you don't want complete privacy, but you also don't want to tell everybody all your data, through a distributed consensus. So that's somewhere where Web 3.0 also comes in. It makes just some other industries much more efficient, by using DLT, in particular permission DLT. So that's another leg outside of fintech where Corda is being used quite a lot. Or think about the music industry, royalties, storing royalties. It's like a great example where you don't want to share all your information, but you need to invite people and let them and share information on a need-to-know basis. So
that's definitely a good use case. We had more.
I just have a question here. Maybe I didn't understand, but you said you are not using blockchain. You are actually using transaction chain to encrypt the transaction rather than the block. Am I right or am I wrong? So you said in terms of technical stuff, you actually don't use a blockchain, but actually use the transaction. So you can actually distribute it, and everyone only sees what actually belongs to him.
Question is around transaction versus blockchain.
Yeah.
There's. We're talking about blockchain, but we are talking about a different technology. If you are just using the transaction instead of the blockchain, right?
Right. So Corda and Conclave can be separated, but there are ways to combine them in such a way that you're validating nodes and validating blocks in this secure environment, so that you're only passing forward the validation that block brings, but you're not seeing the underlying data behind it. So you can work in a way that a lot of what I was describing was actually processing sensitive information before you put it on the chain. But you can also actually, for the CBDCs, for example, you're actually validating the block or the block in that protected environment, and then passing out that report that allows you to complete the next transaction. So there's multiple ways to do it, depending on the use case, but I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess, Tim, it helps to give context as to how Conclave came about. It was, we were working with Corda, with our enterprise clients, and then we discovered the Conclave use case, and that's where I guess Conclave spun out of R3.
You had more questions?
Yeah. What is your sort of engagement model or typical engagement model with fintech and startups? So you take a use case in, and then you go back to your partner to see if there's a use case? How would that work from a company that wants to start working? That is really, I see the potential, and I understand why banks put a couple of millions back in the days into this. But if you can walk us through that part, that would be nice.
Yeah, of course. So I guess in terms of the engagement and how we work with startups, so you can think of us as a corporate accelerator, right? And the corporate side of it is our technology. We're a technology first firm, so we have two technologies, Corda and Conclave. Now, if you have a use case, if you want to use our technology, Corda and Conclave, you can be part of the venture development program, and we'll help you to support you in using our technology and helping you to achieve your business goals, right? Because our main priority is to get as many people to use Corda and Conclave as possible. And the venture development team is there to support you, whatever sort of use cases you may have, or, industry that you're working in, you would basically we would be your port of call, and we will help you to develop those technologies and with fundraising, with go to market. So I think one point which is like, especially in the fintech industry, you saw the slide of our clients that we work with. One of the great things about working in a corporate accelerator is the fact that we have enterprise clients and all of these big banks and central banks that we work with, and from their perspective, they want to see all of the innovative companies that are changing the landscape of fintech, right? And we basically provide them access to the fintech companies in our venture development program. So they get to see, all of the new innovative startups that are appearing in fintech. And for the startups, they get to, talk to the big banks and enterprises that they're trying to sell to. So we really expedite that process, and we have, loads of initiatives that we have in place to accelerate that go to market. So I guess I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thanks.
I have a question. It's probably an absolute noob question, so don't judge me. But why are people then this sounds all great, but why are people still on public blockchains then?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? And you have to really determine what blockchain technology or what DLT technology is suitable for your business, and the DLT technology that will enhance your use case, right? In terms of where we operate in a regulated market where business-to-business transactions are taking place, and the public blockchain, all of the stuff happening on the public blockchain side, that technology can't be used in this environment simply because of the regulations and the privacy, and the scalability issues. So for that, and that's why we created Corda, is to be a B2B private blockchain. So we operate in a regulated market and we do it for businesses. So I guess that's how we're different. We still, in our venture program, we see a lot of companies with B2C applications and use cases, and in some instances we do accept them into the program, but that's not our specialty. That's not our secret sauce, if that makes sense.
Okay. We have another question. Oh yeah, sorry, Bastian, go ahead.
No, just quickly from the use cases I've been working with, one very important element is the transaction finality, which means transactions are actually being directly authorized by the notary when two people agree, or when effectively the state is agreed. While on a public blockchain, you always go through a distributed consensus mechanism. So that's typically when we talk about proof of work or proof of stake, and that's where also then the information distribution comes in, because everybody sees it. So a lot of businesses, when you agree on terms or conditions of your transactions, you want to have this transaction being closed and not waiting for external validators.
Yeah, there are pros and cons, right? Some want to have a distributed validator, the other want to have just these three people can validate. And I think the case that you're making for B2B and transactions is I think, very, very strong. We have some maybe final last question. I see some was online.
Yeah.
Maybe one last online and one last here. If there is one. So what do you have?
So I believe, okay. So answering Tillman's question in terms of the provenance and the migration from Hyperledger to public Cosmos-based solutions, I think we are seeing a lot of solutions out there that we're seeing a lot of startups that previously built on a public blockchain or moving towards more of a private model or moving towards more of a hybrid model. I think our view as a company is that we want to be the backbone infrastructure for the financial markets, and we're happy to have layer 2 solutions on top of that, combining with public blockchain. So we're speaking to the point of interoperability. We want those relationships, and we want to form those ecosystems and networks. And I think it's definitely there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the space. So it's an exciting time to be in it for sure.
Perfect. Exciting times for sure. Thanks a lot for coming in and the presentation. Maybe just a last word from our end. We have the big demo day upcoming with early stage startups on the 15th of December. If you didn't sign up already, go to our website and find it under events. And definitely
there's also a QR code.
There's a QR code here for the people in the room. And obviously we have the next Lunch and Learn upcoming on
next year. This one is the final one for this year.
Oh, it's the last one this year, so January 2023. Exciting. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining, and have a good lunch or evening wherever you are globally.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.